My name is Emma. I never imagined that a simple vacation in Africa would change my life in such an unexpected way. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, you'll understand the weight of every word I'm about to share. Don't forget to subscribe to Bold Confessions because the truth only gets darker from here. I came here to escape the hustle and bustle of my life in the UK, just needed to breathe, explore, and take a break from the monotony. But when I stepped off that plane, I had no idea how different things were about to get. I found myself in a small village, far from the comforts of home. It was quiet, peaceful, almost like stepping into another world. That's when I met them, Solomon and Kojo. At first, they seemed like just two good-hearted, hard-working men. Solomon, with his broad shoulders and gentle smile, seemed to know everything about the village and its people. Kojo, on the other hand, had this kind of quiet intensity about him, always thoughtful, always aware of his surroundings. The way they interacted with each other told me they were old friends, but there was an undercurrent between them that I couldn't quite place. We spent the first few days just talking, exploring the land, and getting to know each other. Solomon took me around, showing me the beauty of the village, the vibrant colors of the markets, the peaceful rhythm of everyday life. Kojo introduced me to the local customs, the traditions that had been passed down for generations. He would sit with me and explain everything, making sure I understood and appreciated the culture. I admired how deep their connection to the land was, how connected they were to everything around them. But then, as the days went by, I started feeling something I hadn't expected. I started getting emotionally attached to both of them, but in different ways. With Solomon, it was easy, he was charming, effortlessly kind, and seemed to understand me on a level that felt almost intimate. With Kojo, there was this magnetic pull, something deeper than I could explain. I couldn't decide where my heart was leaning. I wasn't ready to admit it, but I could sense that things were changing between us. The air between us felt charged, but I kept telling myself it was nothing. One evening, Solomon and I had dinner alone. It was a quiet meal, just the two of us, under the stars. We talked about life, love, and everything in between. It was during that conversation that I felt the weight of our connection. But as I glanced across the room, I saw Kojo watching us from a distance. His eyes weren't angry, but they were unsettled. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about it felt wrong. And that's when I realized it, I was starting to care about both of them. And I didn't know what to do with these feelings. I never thought this would happen, being torn between two men, two souls who couldn't be more different, yet both so captivating in their own ways. The confusion started weighing heavily on me, so I turned to someone I trusted, Margaret, a local woman I'd met during my stay. We were sitting in a small cafe when I finally decided to speak up. I don't know what's happening, I confessed to her, my voice barely above a whisper. I feel so connected to Solomon and Kojo. But I don't know if it's just the village or something more. Margaret looked at me with a knowing expression, her eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. My dear, both of them have feelings for you, she said softly, her words hitting me like a punch to the gut. I'm not sure they'll admit it openly, but trust me, their hearts are tangled in your presence. I felt the weight of her words, but I couldn't bring myself to believe it. I was just a visitor, how could they truly feel anything beyond the temporary connection we'd shared? Still, the seed of doubt had been planted, and the rest of the day felt suffocating as I tried to push it from my mind. The next few days were a blur as I continued to spend time with both men. Solomon was easy to talk to. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and I began to feel like I could tell him anything. We talked about everything. Our families, our dreams, the struggles we had faced. There was an intimacy in the way he listened to me, as though he understood me better than I understood myself. But then there was Kojo. We spent the next day together, walking along the quiet paths of the village. It was as though the world had shrunk to just the two of us. And then, in the silence between us, he said something that shook me to the core. I love you, Emma, he confessed, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I froze, unable to process his words. I had no idea how to respond. Kojo, I started, but the words wouldn't come. I felt a pang of guilt as his eyes searched mine, expecting some sort of response. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I had feelings for both of them, but I had no idea how to handle it. The guilt grew heavier with every passing second. How could I choose? They both held pieces of my heart, and I didn't know if I was ready to shatter either of them. That night, I found myself staring at a photo of the three of us, a moment captured in time. It seemed so simple then. But now, it felt like a cruel reminder of how complicated things had become. Could I ever choose between them? Or was I destined to lose both of them? I had been living in this emotional turmoil for days, unsure of what to do. The weight of my feelings for both Solomon and Kojo was suffocating, and I knew I couldn't keep lying to them, or to myself. Something had to give, and it was time to face the truth. So, I made the decision to speak to them both, one by one. I thought that perhaps by separating them, I could spare them some of the heartache. But deep down, I knew there was no easy way out. I decided to meet Solomon first. I asked him to meet me by the quiet riverbank where we often went for walks. The water's gentle flow matched the calmness I was trying to hold on to inside. When he arrived, there was a slight nervousness in his smile, but his eyes were soft, as if he already knew what I was about to say. "Solomon," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "I have to tell you something. I've fallen for you." His face lit up with a look of such warmth, it almost took my breath away. "Emma," he replied, taking my hands in his. "I've loved you from the very moment I saw you. And my feelings for you have only deepened over time." Relief washed over me like a flood. He felt the same way. For a brief moment, everything seemed right in the world. But as I left him, a sense of unease gripped me. I couldn't help but feel that I was leaving something undone, something that had to be resolved. I wasn't ready to hurt Kojo, he deserved to know how I felt too. That evening, I met Kojo at the small clearing we often visited after long days of work. The setting sun cast long shadows on the ground, and the air felt thick with the weight of what I had to say. I took a deep breath before I spoke. "Kojo," I started, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything. And I need to be honest with you. I've fallen for you, too." There was a long silence, and for a moment, I thought he hadn't heard me. His face was unreadable, but when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost too calm. "I knew you cared for Solomon," he said slowly, "but I wasn't ready to give up on us. I love you, Emma. I have since the moment we met." I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the quiet desperation, and it broke me. I hadn't meant to hurt him, but here we were. Two men, both of whom had claimed my heart in different ways. And I had no idea how to navigate this storm I had caused. The truth settled heavily on my chest, and the weight of my actions hit me harder than I expected. I had never meant to lead either of them on, but I couldn't deny what had happened. The thought of choosing one over the other seemed impossible, and yet, I knew I had to make a choice. But could I? As I lay awake that night, the realization sank in deeper. No matter what I decided, someone was going to get hurt. And there was no turning back. Could I live with that? Everything was falling apart. I thought I could balance my feelings for Solomon and Kojo, but now it felt like I was slowly drowning in this tangled mess I had created. The more I tried to distance myself from both of them, the more the web of deceit tightened around me. I spent less time with Solomon and Kojo, desperately trying to clear my mind. I needed to figure out what I wanted, but the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. Each man had a piece of my heart, and the thought of losing one of them was unbearable. But the distance I was creating only seemed to make things worse. One evening, Solomon approached me as I sat by the fire, my mind racing. He could tell something was off. The concern in his eyes made me feel guilty. "Emma, what's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with frustration. "You've been avoiding me. You're not yourself. What's happening between us?" I felt the weight of his words, and my throat tightened. I wanted to tell him everything, the truth, the guilt, the confusion. But all that came out was a whisper. "I don't know, Solomon. I'm so confused. I don't know how to choose between you and Kojo. My heart is torn in two." His face darkened, and I could see the anger building in him. His fists clenched by his sides, and he looked away for a moment, as if trying to control his emotions. "You don't know how to choose," he repeated bitterly. "So that's it? You're just going to keep playing with both of us, pretending like we don't matter? You can't even decide if you want me or him." His words stung, more than I expected. But the pain in his voice was real, and it shook me to the core. He was angry, and I couldn't blame him. How could I ask him to wait forever? But I wasn't ready to let go either. While I was dealing with Solomon's anger, Kojo's behavior began to shift. He started showing up uninvited when I was with Solomon, standing too close, his presence heavy and possessive. At first, I thought it was just coincidence, but it became a pattern. The jealousy between the two men was palpable, and the tension grew every time they crossed paths. I could feel their eyes burning into each other, the silent battle of pride and insecurity unfolding in front of me. I had never seen Solomon so angry, nor Kojo so possessive. It was like they were fighting for a prize they both thought they deserved. I had never thought of either of them like this. The men I once admired, Solomon for his calm, thoughtful nature and Kojo for his passion and loyalty, were now showing their darker sides. Solomon's pride was evident, and Kojo's jealousy was suffocating. I was terrified of what this would do to their friendship, and more importantly, I was scared of what it was doing to me. I began to see the situation for what it truly was, a dangerous game of emotions that neither of us could win. No matter how much I cared for them, no matter how much I had hoped things would work out, the reality was harsh and cruel. I was caught between two men, each of whom had a piece of my heart, but neither of whom would settle for sharing. I started isolating myself, spending more time alone. I needed to reflect, to clear my head, but the tension between the two men followed me wherever I went. It felt like I was suffocating under the weight of their expectations, their love, their anger. I couldn't escape it, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The worst part? I knew something had to give. I couldn't keep this up forever. Either I had to choose, or I risked losing both of them. The night ended with the inevitable. I received 2 messages. One from Solomon. One from Kojo. Both asking for a serious conversation. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the overwhelming anxiety. The moment had arrived. There was no turning back now. The weight of the world pressed on my chest as I walked to the clearing where I had agreed to meet Solomon and Kojo. It felt like everything had led up to this moment, the decision that would break hearts, including my own. I had tried to delay it, to avoid the inevitable, but there was no way around it now. I had to choose. And choosing meant that someone would be left shattered. As I stood there, the familiar faces of Solomon and Kojo appeared from the distance, their eyes filled with hope and uncertainty. I had told them both that I needed time to think, but now, the time had come to speak the truth. There was no easy way to say this. There was no perfect way to choose between them. Solomon was the first to speak. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with a quiet desperation. "I've loved you from the start. I've always known that we were meant to be together. There's no one else for me. Please, don't let this distance between us grow any further. You belong with me." His words hit me like a tidal wave. I had always known that Solomon was the steady force in my life. His calmness, his wisdom, he was everything I thought I needed. But my heart felt like it was being torn apart as I looked at Kojo, whose eyes were filled with a sadness that I couldn't ignore. Kojo took a step forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Emma, I've never been good with words. But you've always been the one who understood me. You brought out a side of me I didn't even know existed. I love you, and I don't want to lose you. But I can't pretend like I don't care. I won't back down, Emma. I want you." I felt the depth of his words in my bones. Kojo had always been the passionate one, the one who made me feel alive in a way that Solomon never could. His love was fierce, unyielding, and I couldn't deny that a part of me was drawn to that intensity. But I also couldn't deny that the weight of the past few weeks had started to erode that connection. I closed my eyes, trying to push back the tears that threatened to spill. The guilt, the heartbreak, it was all too much. I had never intended to hurt either of them, but I had done it. I had strung them both along, letting them believe that I could be with them without realizing how much pain I was causing. "Solomon," I whispered, my voice trembling, "I'm sorry. I've loved both of you, but I need to be honest with myself." The words felt like they were choking me, but I forced them out. "I choose you." Solomon's eyes softened, and I saw a flicker of relief mixed with sadness. He took a step forward, his hand reaching for mine. But the moment was short-lived. Kojo turned away, his fists clenched at his sides. "I understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I won't forget this, Emma. You've broken something between us. Our friendship will never be the same." I wanted to say something, to apologize, to make it right, but the truth was, nothing could fix the rift that had formed. Solomon and Kojo were no longer just friends. They were rivals. And no matter what I did, the damage had been done. As I stood there, watching Kojo walk away, a wave of regret washed over me. I had chosen Solomon, but at what cost? The peaceful village I had come to love, the bonds I had cherished, it all felt so fragile now. The once simple life I had enjoyed now felt like a distant memory. There was no going back. I had chosen, but I wasn't sure if it was the right choice. I turned to Solomon, whose face showed both relief and sadness. "Emma, we'll make this work. I promise," he said, pulling me into a tight embrace. But even as he said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had been broken, something that could never be repaired. The episode ends with me alone in the quiet of the night, the weight of my decision heavy on my heart. I stared at the stars above, lost in my own thoughts, questioning everything. Was love really worth this much pain? Was it worth the heartbreak, the rift it had caused? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure: things would never be the same again. It's been months since everything changed. The dust has settled, the chaos has calmed, and the village has somehow returned to a semblance of normalcy. Solomon and I are together, but even though everything seems fine on the outside, the weight of the past still clings to me. I can't escape the guilt of what happened between Kojo and me, the heartbreak, the confusion, the feeling that I had ruined everything. I've stayed away from Kojo, but the guilt has been gnawing at me for months. I've tried to push it down, to move on with Solomon, but it hasn't been easy. I miss the old days, the friendship, the laughter, the comfort we had with each other. And as much as I've tried to convince myself that I made the right choice, something still feels wrong. So, I reach out to Kojo. I don't know what I'm expecting, but I'm hoping for some sort of reconciliation. Maybe we can be friends again, maybe he can forgive me. But when I see him, my heart sinks. He's not the same Kojo I knew. There's a woman with him now, a woman who seems to have taken the place I once held. Kojo looks at me, and there's no anger in his eyes anymore. There's a calmness, a sense of acceptance. He's moved on. He's found someone new, someone who makes him smile in a way I couldn't anymore. And when he tells me that he's learned to live without me, that he's finally found happiness, something inside me breaks. It's not anger, not resentment, but a deep sense of loss. I'm glad for him, I tell myself. He deserves happiness. But the selfish part of me wishes things had been different. I never meant to hurt him. I never meant to destroy our friendship. Solomon and I continue our relationship, but I can't shake the feeling that I've lost something. Something precious. The emotional scars of the past linger, no matter how much I try to ignore them. I feel guilty every time I look at Solomon. I wonder if he truly understands the toll this has taken on me. And then, the final twist comes. Kojo tells me something that I wasn't expecting to hear. He knew all along. He knew about my feelings for Solomon. He wasn't defeated in love, he stepped aside because he wanted me to be happy. He didn't want to be the one to stand in the way of what I needed. As I process his words, everything clicks into place. The pieces I couldn't understand, the silence, the distance, it all makes sense now. Kojo didn't let go because he had lost. He let go because he loved me enough to put my happiness before his own. I sit alone that night, in the quiet of my room, reflecting on everything. The choices I made, the people I hurt, the love I lost. It's a lot to take in. Love isn't simple, and it's never clear-cut. I learned that the hard way. Sometimes, love means letting go. Sometimes, the hardest part of love is choosing not to hurt those who care for you. I've learned that letting go isn't just about walking away, it's about making peace with the decisions you've made, accepting the consequences, and understanding that love isn't always about being with the one you want. Sometimes, it's about being brave enough to let someone else have their happiness. As I look directly at the camera, I feel the weight of the lesson I've learned. Sometimes, the hardest part of love is choosing not to hurt those who care for you, I say softly. I've learned that sometimes letting go is the most loving thing you can do. Thank you for watching. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where love and loyalty were tested, share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Bold Confessions for more raw and real stories. See you next time.